Hey Blipsounds, and welcome to another side quest challenge. In our previous challenge, we did using only 5 plugins on a mix, and I really enjoyed hearing all of your mixes. I enjoyed seeing your videos and seeing the things that you guys did, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed all of our conversations on there, and I'm really excited for this next side quest. Before we get into it, a little bit of backstory. Like video games, these side quests are a chance to give you more opportunities to practice, to gain XP, to get more familiar with your DAW, with plugins, with understanding mixing and various things like that. And with this challenge we have coming up, this is our 1 hour mix challenge. And the challenge is to mix an entire song in 1 hour. And there's a few different reasons why this is a really good challenge, why it's really good practice. The first reason is, like our 5 plugin challenge, just like the first reason is very similar to our 5 plugin challenge. It's this idea of creating an arbitrary deadline. When you have a deadline, you're forced to finish a mix. You are forced to figure out when a mix is done. And with this 1 hour mix, you have only 1 hour to mix it. And you have a deadline. This way, you don't fall into that trap of eternally mixing. You don't fall into the trap of blindly going through without really knowing where you're going. Because the best way to finish a mix is to have an idea in mind of where you want to end up. You want to have a roadmap. It would be like telling people you're going on vacation, and when they say, "Oh, where are you going?" you'll say, "I don't know, but I'll let you know when I get there." There's really no rhyme or reason. You don't know why you're using these plugins. You don't know why you're making these decisions on the mix, because you don't know where you want to end up. So with having a mix that you can only do in an hour, you have to figure out pretty early on, okay, where do I want to end up and how do I get there? The other thing that this teaches you is how to commit. So you have to make decisions quickly, and you have to commit, and you have to move on, because you only have an hour to get there. And lastly, it's just a great exercise in sitting down and doing a project from start to finish. You have this one session to work in, and it has to be done when you leave. So just a couple of ground rules. What doesn't count towards your hour is the mix setup. So that includes getting all of the multi-tracks into your DAW. That includes getting your tracks lined up the way you want to. And that includes getting them bussed to all your different locations. The moment you touch a fader, a pan, pot, or a plugin is the moment your hour starts. So my advice would be, line up all your tracks and just listen to it a few times, and solo a couple tracks. Solo a couple of them, listen what's going on, and start getting a roadmap in your mind. Start thinking, okay, what do I want to do? And then as soon as you're ready, hit go, and then move all the faders and pan pots and plugins to your desire. The other thing is unlike our 5 plugin challenge, you're allowed to use as many plugins as you want this time around. There's no limit to how many plugins you get to use. You can put 5 plugins on every track if you want to. The other thing, because this is a fairly quick session, most of you will probably be spending an hour and a half at most, more likely an hour and 10, an hour and 15 minutes. With the exception of just busy lifestyles, this should go fairly quickly. So I anticipate that we should be able to wrap this up by either this weekend or by midweek. So we'll start this on 12/3, which is Monday, and I'll touch base with you guys on 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll touch with you guys on Saturday the 8th, see how you guys are doing, and if there's still more of you that wants to get a chance, we'll push it into next week. But if not, I would like to try and wrap it up by Saturday or Sunday and just spend some time talking about it. If you are watching this on Blipsounds, the link for the multi-tracks will be somewhere in the channel that you can go ahead and grab them. If you have any questions about it, you can ask me in our questions channel, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. If you are watching this on YouTube and you would like to participate, there will be a link to our Discord channel down in the section below. If you're interested in sound design, if you're just really curious as to what goes into making sounds for video games, we would love to have you join us. We have people of all different places in their journey of sound design and learning how to make sounds and make music in video games, and we would love to have any of you be there. Lastly, after we get done with this, I'm going to go into how I did this challenge. If you just want to dive in, feel free to stop this video and go ahead and grab the multi-tracks and get started. The other thing too, what I didn't expect, what I thought was kind of neat, was how a lot of you made videos for the 5 plugin challenge explaining what you did. And some of you asked if that was a requirement. And so one thing I want to say is that is definitely not a requirement. If you want to and you feel like you want to make a video, definitely do that, because I enjoyed the videos and I enjoyed hearing and learning from you guys. And I know a lot of people in our community enjoyed it as well, seeing other different interpretations of the mix. So after you get done with this challenge, if you want to make a video as well and post it in our Discord channel, I know I would appreciate it, and I know some of our other community members would appreciate it as well. But that is not a requirement. You don't have to make a video, so please don't feel any pressure to do so. So without further ado, we're going to dive into how I did my mix, and I'm excited to share this with you. So go ahead and cut it now if you want to get started, and if not, hang around and see how I did it. So, as I've said before, the DAW that I'm using is called Studio One by Presonus. The track that we are doing, it's called Hot Bodies, and I actually forget the name of it right now. I will post it in our Discord channel. I forget the name of the band that did it. These tracks were recorded by our very own Proximity Sound, and he graciously shared them with us. And I do want to reiterate that when you make this mix, please only share it within Blipsounds. Don't share this with the rest of the outside committee unless you get, or the outside world, unless you get permission from Proximity Sound. So I'm going to actually start this actually with all of my plugins off. And we're just going to take, it's going to be a little quiet, but we're going to go ahead and just listen to it with the plugins off and just hear what I had to start with. So that's just a real quick intro to it. It's very much a kind of like dirty punk song, just really aggressive. There's no actual guitar tracks, it's just bass tracks. We have a bass amp and a bass DI. We have a synth track and we have vocals. And then we have our drum tracks. So it's really simple, really easy, not a whole lot going on. And this serves really well for doing a 1-hour mix challenge because there's not a whole lot we have to dive into. But as I listened to it a couple times, I could already identify some pretty quick areas. You'll see right away I muted the Tom 1 track. I listened to it, and aside from picking up what all the other drums are doing, he never really hits it. The drummer only ever hits the floor tom a few times. So rather than mess around with trying to make sure that I had a gate that open, I just muted the parts where they're not playing. I did the same thing with the hat. There's a few times where they're playing on the hat and not playing on it, and I muted those. Also, looking at the waveform, you notice that the vocals are very, very dynamic. And I knew early on that I was going to have a couple decisions that I was going to have to make. I was either going to do a lot of vocal automation, which was going to eat up a lot of time, or I was going to heavily compress these vocals. I opted for heavy compression for two reasons. One, like I said, I didn't want to eat up all of my time with vocal automation. And two, I was going to opt to use 1176 compressors, which were going to add a lot of saturation to the vocals. And I knew with this being an aggressive punk track, I was going to want to use as much saturation and distortion as possible to make it super aggressive and super in your face. And I knew the plugins that I was going to want to use. The other thing is I also use templates. So I have a pre-built template, which includes all of these bus tracks and effects tracks. And they come with all of these plugins loaded in, but turned off. So I do this because I know that these are the plugins I'm going to go to almost all of the time. If I don't use them, I might swap them out for something else, but I'm going to almost always use these plugins here. And so I like having them on and just being there ready for me to go. And then, I have effects tracks already set up. If I don't need them, I can just delete them. But then this way, I'm not spending a whole lot of time setting up buses and effects tracks and having to constantly route everything. And Studio One is really, I think one of its strengths is its routing. It's not as... You can't get as complicated with the routing as Pro Tools and Reaper, but I enjoy the ease of routing with this, and I enjoy how automatically the buses and effects channels look different from everything else. It's just visually, it helps me out a lot to see these things differently, and I like having my buses over here. And I also, anytime I have multiple instruments, like with my snare drums and toms, I always bus them as well. These snare drum mics, they were recorded really well. They're already in phase, so when you listen to them, like I went and I checked the phase on them. And when I inverted the phase, already it starts to get really nasty sounding. So I already knew that they were in phase. Another way that you can check that out is by actually increasing the size of the tracks, and then you can go in and you can look, and you'll see all of these peaks and valleys actually line up between these two tracks. So visually, they're pretty close to being in phase. So like I said, when Proximity, I believe it was Proximity that recorded these, he did a really good job of checking the phase, making sure everything was lined up. And you can hear all of these tracks were recorded together. You can actually hear some of the bleed in all of the mics. And there's already some vocal effects printed to these tracks, which was going to be another reason that I was going to want to use heavy compression versus vocal writing. So knowing where I wanted to go, knowing that I wanted to end up with a very aggressive mix, I knew that I was going to want to use a lot of plugins that offer that sort of saturation. And when I start mixing, I personally like to start from the drums. So we only had one kick drum track, so I used the British channel from IK Multimedia, which simulates an SSL channel. So it's on its own, it's a really good sounding kick. With the SSL channel, I put it through a lot of heavy compression. and really boosted the top and the low end. And I kind of took some of those mids out, because without it, you can hear that there's it was too mid-rangey, and I wanted it more to poke out. And of course, with this model, I can really gain into it. So I'm peaking in the plugin going into it, but again, I wanted to add some of that saturation. And then I use the Waves channel, the Waves SSL, which is the brother, and I hadn't tried it before, but I wanted to kind of dig into it a little bit more with this mix. Did a very similar thing with the snare, where I really drove it hard. So again, I'm driving very hard into it. I'm redlining, doing some compression. I'm cutting out some of the top mids and low mids. And then I rolled off some of that low end, and there was still a sound with this drum here, with the top mic. So I actually went in with my EQ, found it, and took it out. It was just, I could hear that ringing, so I went hunting for it and just took the ringing out, narrowed down the Q some, and just took it out. And then similar with the tom, again, just went really heavy on the tom. Let's find a section where the tom plays. Actually turn this off. So what I did with the tom, I like the sound of it. I don't mind the sound of it, but it was a little too blatty. So I boosted the high end, cut a little bit in some of the mid range, boosted some low end, but again I did some roll off, because without the roll off it rang a little too much. And again, a lot of heavy compression going on. That kind of helps it poke out of the mix some.
Let me landscape you. Let me snow blow your drive.
One of the only things differently that I did from the multi-tracks is you see we have overhead right and left, but I'm actually panning them differently. And the reason being is when I mix, I mix what's known as the drummer position. So in the drummer position, you have the hi-hat on your left side, and then you have the ride and your floor tom on your right side. When you mix from the audience perspective, you mix with your hi-hat on the right side and your ride and floor tom on the left side. These are purely decisions that you would make as a mixer. They have there's no hard set rules as to what you should or shouldn't do. It's just the way that I like to mix. That's just the way I like to sound. I'm a drummer by trade, and that's just how I hear things, and that's how I like to mix. With my overheads, I did a lot of compression with the 76. And this was to bring out more of that room. So one thing it does, it brings out more of the cymbals, but then you hear more of that room in there. It also helps to tame it, because when the drummer's really whacking away on the floor tom and snare, you can see that this overhead channel just redlines, and so this is helping keeping them in place. Next we have the two bass tracks. Just have them play. So this is the track. This was the bass amp. And what I put on it was I put the H comp from Waves, which was actually free for a little while. And you can see I am compressing the snot out of it. I am going to town. And the reason being was to level it off more, because without it, the bass gets a little too dynamic. So you hear how when those high notes come in, it dies off a little. So I compress the snot out of it to keep it pretty level. And then when it goes into those more high-pitched notes, it stays pretty consistent. And then with the bass DI, I wanted to make it more aggressive. There's no electric guitar track, so I made my own faux electric guitar track. Before I did the amp sim, I actually started with the red light distortion plugin that comes standard with Studio One. And I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. It was getting me sort of there, so I ditched it in favor of the Amplitude, which is the amp sim from IK Multimedia. I tried a couple different amps until I settled on this orange amp. The model is based off of the Orange 120. And I run it into a cab, and all I'm using is just the SM57 mic. And what's kind of neat is you can select different speaker cones if you want to. You can select different cabs. You can say where you want to position the mic, how far away from the amp. And so I kind of position it right about at the edge where the cone, like right about here where the cone meets the speaker. And I get right up on it, like basically as if I was on the screen. And I have a whole bunch of different mics that I wanted to choose from, but I went with the 57 because I don't need low end. I'm getting plenty of low end from the bass cab. I drive into it, but I have the master turned down. As you can see, I've got the 57 cranked up, and then I added a chorus effect on it to give it more of a stereo sound. So now we'll listen to it with it on. So the chorus effect is just giving it a bit of a faux stereo. If you listen to it in mono, you can definitely hear that chorus effect. And so like a lot of punk and modern rock songs, oftentimes the electric guitars will be playing the same thing as the bass. So I didn't mind that it was the exact same track. I feel like it allowed them both to really add more weight to each other. And so then the next that we had was our synth track, which is not playing there. The synth track itself actually sounds fine. It sounds really good. There were a couple frequencies that I was kind of annoyed by that I could hear when I was listening to it, as well as I also knew that the synth and the vocals were going to fight each other. So one of the first things that I did is, you can see I rolled off a lot of the low end. I kind of gave it a little bit of boost and scooped out some of the areas that were offending me. There's still some offensive areas in there, but you're hearing it in solo. When you hear it in the whole mix, those kind of offensive areas help it poke out of the mix. So I wasn't terribly worried about that. But then what I did was I used the vocal doubler. This is free from Isotope. You can download it for free. And again, I just wanted to add a little bit of stereo separation because there's a lot of mono going on in this track. And same thing, if you drop it down to mono, it sounds like a chorus effect. So that just helps when you're listening to it with the vocals. Here, let's... So that just... that allows it to have a little bit of width to it and kind of gets it out of the way of the vocals. And then with the vocals, like I said, I knew I was going to want to do a lot of heavy compression. Oh, I didn't even talk about these tracks over here with the drums. So let's go back to our drums. So with the... how I bust my drums out is I bust out drums low end, which is anything with shells, bass drum or kick drum, snare drum, toms. And if I'm going to do comping, if I'm going to do parallel compression, that's the track I'm going to do it on. And drums high end, these are all of my cymbals, room mics, overheads, all of those things come here. I like a lot of heavy compression on drums because I like very fat, aggressive drums. So I used a 76 on there. Let's actually go back to the beginning. So it's helping tame it a little bit more. It's not doing a whole lot to it. And then I use this Klingelheim tube, which is also available for free. And as you can see, I'm driving it hard, but I'm only mixing it at 60%. So it's adding a little bit more fatness. It's adding a little bit more snare sound. And then I do parallel compression. And I'm just blending that in. I'm using the bus compressor. Just fast attack, fast release, heavy threshold, heavy ratio, and I'm just smacking it. Adding in some grit in, and then just blending it in with the track. That just brings out a little bit of body, and then I add a little bit more compression on top. Which apparently I'm not hitting it hard to get there. And then, like I said, I have my shells, I have my high end here, which I run into the Sheps Omni channel, which is a modular plugin, and I really like it. Here I'm using the pre, a lot of heavy saturation. I'm using the compressor, which I am compressing the snot out of it. And then doing some de-essing on the top, because that just helps to tame some of those cymbals. And so all the drums in together. Oh, I was turning on the wrong plugin. Way to go, me. The overheads are also giving us some more kick and snare too. I don't. Did I do much in the way of EQ? No, I really didn't do anything in the way of EQ. It's just the saturation and compression. And so here in our bus channel, this was where I did the heavy compression. First, I used Bluey, the Blue 76 from Waves. Let's get to a fairly loud section.
Hot body need your hot body need your hot body. Hot body need your hot body need your.
So I'm doing a fairly medium attack. 76s just by nature have fast attacks. And I've mentioned this before. 76ers are they're FET compressors, and they use transistors, and so they add saturation naturally through the transistors built into them. And I like this Bluey. I'm doing a medium input, and I'm getting pretty loud on the vocals, and that's where I'm going to use the second 76 from T-Rax, which has a little bit, in my mind, it has a little bit more saturation on it. So here I'm actually bringing the volume down a little bit more. I'm still compressing very heavily into it. But this helps me to tame the vocals so they're not as loud. And the other thing you'll notice is that you start to hear more of that printed effect start to come out. And then just a little bit of EQ to roll off some of that low end, because you can hear a lot of kick in her vocals, and I didn't want that. I didn't want to overdo it on the kick. So that just takes a lot of kick out of her voice, and because I'm over compressing it, there's always the risk that the S's are going to be sharper. So I grabbed. Oh no, I didn't use the de-essing. Actually used the denoiser from RX because you can hear buzzing in there. And so what that does is that just takes out some of that low end like hum and noising that's going on in the background. And it also helps her vocals to pop out a little bit more. And then similar with the drums, I was doing parallel compression, but I was using the soft tube from Klingelheim again, doing heavy driving into it. I'm not using the mix knob because I'm doing parallel. So you just hear. So you hear how it's dirtying up her vocal, and then we blend it in. And you can hear how it's starting to thicken up her vocals a little bit. And no, I didn't use that. Did I use this at all? No, I don't think I used that. And then for my bus, so I route things into a submix, and then if I want to do any parallel on the submix, I have the option here with some effects channels, into a final mix, and then into my out. These are buses that I set up. So for my EQ, scooped off just a little bit of that low end. There's not a lot happening down there. So I just wanted to get rid of it, and I'm doing a little bit of a cut around 390. I just kind of swept around for it, waited till I heard what sounded like really boxy and roomy. And then just gave it a little top end boost just to add some air and some clarity into it. I'm using a bus compressor. Going for a medium attack, medium release, not a heavy ratio, and I barely ever kiss 4. It's just mainly taming everything. Without it, it just kind of helps bring out the instruments a little bit more. And then the last thing that I added was this saturation. It mimics a bunch of different kinds of saturations from T-Rax. So we have different kinds of tape saturations. We have master mode. We have tube saturations with either a push-pull or a class A. Solid state, also similar to a FET. And then we have steel and iron transistors, which you can really drive heavy into. And so this mimics tape machines. These mimic sum boxes or summing boxes and things like that. And so I went with tape 2. So what that does is that automatically brings more low end to life, and that's the tape 2 setting. It does a lot more low end, and really adds a lot more aggression to the mix. And then the last thing that I did was I added in my final limiters, and this was to get me up to loudness. Excuse me. And that's really the essence of my mix. And so I'll start it over, and I'll give you a listen with and without the plugins on or off. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is just some editing decisions that I made. These tracks actually continue on. They don't break off. I edited these, and the reason being was I wanted to add a little bit more dynamics to this mix, make it a little bit more interesting. Because they continue on through the whole track, it starts to feel very repetitive. And so when we hit this next verse, I just have the distorted bass and the keys drop out to create a little bit more dynamics.
I need you made me from top to
So that's it for my mix. I did this all. I actually, as I was writing this automation down here for the music track, it was when my hour finally hit. And so I bounced it down and I mixed it and I sent it off. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed everything that I did. I know we went kind of super long with this video, and I thank you for sticking with me. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys do with this mix. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me in Discord. And like I said, if you're watching this on YouTube and you think, hey, I would love to be a part of this, there's a link to the Discord channel down below. We would love to have you join us, and we would love to have you share your experiences and knowledge with us, or come and ask questions, or do whatever. So I hope you guys all have a great one, and I'm going to leave this out playing for you guys. Take care.
From top to bottom.